언니 연락 하세요.
Okay, good afternoon, and welcome everyone to our session on transforming agriculture, transforming conservation. This is the second part in a two-part series. I think many folks in the room were at this morning's very exciting panel on moving from competition to collaboration in agriculture and conservation. Very thought-provoking. We will be hearing a little bit of a summary on that panel and then moving into this session. I'm Jessica Brown. I chair a WCPA, World Commission on Protected Areas working group on protected landscapes. And I am also executive director of the New England Biolabs Foundation and one of the partners, along with several others, in making this workshop happen. I'd like my co-collaborators in the workshop to introduce themselves, and before doing that, I want to acknowledge Kira Bush of the Christensen Fund, who was a major player in making this workshop happen.
Good afternoon. I am Ken Wilson of the Christensen Fund, and as Jessica said, I'm one of the three people who tried to initially conceive and realize this workshop, which all kinds of wonderful talent has to be brought by the presenters and by Kira, who's also working with us on our business itself.
Hello, I'm Pablo Ezebin, and I work at Biodiversity International, which is based in Rome, and we've been working a long time also with other partners who are here on the podium on this workshop.
So a quick housekeeping, a couple of housekeeping details. Again, do feel free to move forward so we can make this participatory, but also a reminder that interpretation is available in French, Spanish, English, and Korean. So if you wish to make an intervention in any of those four languages, please feel free, and please use the speakers that are scattered, the devices that are scattered around to take advantage of the interpretation, because it's certainly a wonderful gift to have them. This workshop is, as I said, a partnership effort. The Christensen Fund has collaborated with groups such as Biodiversity International, the IUCN WCPA Protected Landscapes Specialist Group, the UNDP GES Small Grants Program, FAO, GHOS program, the George Wright Society, the Satayama International Partnership, and the National Tropical Botanical Garden. We'll actually be hearing from speakers from several of those partners in the lineup today. We have a great lineup. The point of this workshop is to build on what we had earlier in the panel, recognizing that integrating conservation with agriculture and food security is central to sustainable development at all scales, from community to global, and it is at the heart of the challenges in greening our economy and sustaining ecosystems. If we're really going to be talking about enhancing nature's resilience and sustaining biocultural diversity, we must engage with agriculture. We can't leave it aside. But I think it's only recently that we've really tried to come together. As we heard this morning, it's a challenge on both sides. We in the conservation community are largely represented here, though I hope that it's also we in the agriculture community in this room. We don't always talk to each other, and we need to do more of that. So it's certainly one of the hopes of this two-part program that we will be able to take a big step forward in not just framing the challenges, but actually building some durable and effective partnerships. But the point of this workshop, having kind of framed the challenge this morning, I've heard from an extraordinary lineup of speakers with people in both camps. And the point here is to look more at some practical learning from on the ground and examples of transformational partnerships between conservationists and people in agriculture, and different methods of measuring that, indicators of resilience rather, as well as examples of traditional farming. We hope that we will have time as we move forward. We've asked the speakers to keep their interventions as short as possible so that there's some space for discussion. And it's really great to see such a large audience with so much to offer. So we hope we'll have the opportunity for participation. I'm going to turn this over to Ken, who chaired this morning's session, and give him the challenging task of giving a little bit of a flavor of this morning's panel, and then we'll move on to topic.
So I'm not sure how many of you were there this morning. Any of you who were there this morning's panel will know that it's now impossible for anybody to summarize more or less 2 hours of incredibly rich presentations. But let me try. I would say that what emerged from this morning's panel is the absolute need for the broader conservation community to engage with agriculture. We have to engage with agriculture at all scales. Tends to be the most significant driver of environmental change. We can't ignore it any longer. We can't imagine we have our protected area that can look like an agricultural area and the planet will survive. We can't follow that anymore. But we also learned this morning that it's not true that agricultural land is of zero biodiversity and other ecological importance. What we learned this morning is that there are many ways of practicing agriculture which provide a wonderful context for biodiversity. Thirdly, I think we saw this morning that agriculture is a space in which people interact with nature, and cultures interact with nature. And we don't have the option anymore in the Anthropocene to think that nature is going to survive because we're going to reduce our interactions with it. We've got to increase our interactions with nature in a different kind of way. And agriculture is one of the main ways that we do that. With our hands in the soil and with an interaction with a biodiverse set of food sources, which is what we need for our food and for our health. Something else that I think really became clear this morning is that what kind of agriculture is it that we're going to engage in as a conservation community as we try to rebuild this more holistic relationship? It's going to be, by and large, what is currently characterized as small-scale traditional family agriculture. It's not only going to be with that, and this transformation that's needed is also going to be needed of commercial, large-scale industrial agriculture. But by and large, we're going to find ourselves engaging with what in the past has been seen as backward agriculture. That's the kind of agriculture which works with nature in its nutrient and water cycles. That's the kind of agriculture that sustains not only agrobiodiversity, the diversity of agricultural crops and varieties and so on, but all the other kind of biodiversity which is so important for human and planetary well-being, cultural values, and so on and so forth. And what we heard this morning from this very distinguished set of panelists from different major institutions, both on the conservation and agricultural side, is that to do this is going to require a very significant redirecting of public policy, international policy, and international research efforts towards those which support farming, not just farmers as individual economic actors, but communities, societies, cultures, with sustaining innovation and transformation towards the systems that work with nature in these complicated ways, and which sustain not only biodiversity, but sustain cultural diversity and economic diversity, and really build resilience and really meet human need in a much more comprehensive way than industrial farming has been able to meet human need. So I thought that was rather interesting, that we had so much common vision around that. And I think it's also interesting because many of those kinds of lessons, thinking in whole systems, thinking about the mosaic of whole landscapes, thinking about engaging with people, not just as purely kind of economic actors, but whole engagement with people. These are the same lessons that we've been learning about textile conservation. And that, I think, is why this current session is going to be so interesting. Because if this morning's session was mainly about, confronting this, the global issues in all their huge and possible scale and size, this afternoon session is about lots of very practical things that people have been doing for a number of years to actually work at landscape and other scales to do this in partnerships with different kinds of organizations, conservation, agricultural, community, indigenous organizations working together to do practical things in landscapes. And those kind of lessons, I think, will be not only illuminative of the overall changes we need to make, but also be very encouraging to us that we're engaging in an enterprise which is rich, exciting, fun, doable. So.
Thank you for that very succinct review of an incredibly full and stimulating 2-hour session. Really heard some amazing stories, so thank you for that. I'm going to turn it over to Pablo, who is going to give a PowerPoint presentation on basically kind of setting the stage on for the challenges. In particular, he's going to present indicators of resilience in socio-ecological production landscapes, which he's been involved in developing. Thank you.
I think the other lesson that came out from the morning is that those of us involved in conservation and those of us involved in agriculture and agricultural development are really up against a stone wall. For those in agriculture, unless we turn to biodiversity being conserved somewhere, we're going to be lacking the resources, the knowledge we need to make agriculture viable in the next, even within our lifetimes. And for conservation, given those ambitious targets, and we heard from Braulio Diaz, the head of the Biological Diversity, that they failed to meet their targets. And it's not going to be met simply looking at conservation areas, but also the whole production systems around it. So I'm going to talk about, just give some examples of centers of crop domestication, eco-agricultural adaptation, and most importantly, innovation. And where are we getting these lessons? We're getting them from protected and community-managed conservation areas. So many of us talk about biosphere reserves as protected areas. As an agriculturalist, as someone concerned about where our food came from, who domesticated our food, where did it originate, we realize that many of these areas that we think of as biosphere reserves are also centers of origin of agriculture. So I'm just giving you actually some areas at random, but for example, oil palm, which is so important in Asia, both as a destructive as production system, but also as an essential production systems in other contexts in West Africa and in Asia, originated in West Africa, and the origins are in a biosphere reserve with much more diversity than the world is currently using. Many of the new crops that we're looking at, these crops that have higher nutrient qualities and are adapted to the conditions of the future, such as aluminium toxicity, salt salinization of soils, they're found in these biosphere reserves. Major crops that are spread around the world, for example, the groundnut or peanut in Southeast Asia and Asia, an essential and almost now I would say an indigenous traditional food source, originated in biosphere reserves in Bolivia, domesticated many varieties by indigenous peoples. The potato, the wild notes of potato. So these are centers of conservation, but they're also were the original centers of innovation and are still centers of innovation. We look at Central Asia with the walnut, the apples, quince, all the plums, peaches, the pears, the mulberries, pistachio, not to mention pomegranates. All of these originated there in that region, and they're found still. They're the great diversity in these biosphere reserves. So should we just treat them as conservation areas, or aren't they really centers of innovation? And who is managing these crops in these areas? Often the traditional communities that have lived there for hundreds, if not thousands of years, the indigenous communities. So when we talk about these landscapes, we're really talking about their biocultural entities. They're not simply just a landscape. They're landscapes shaped, seen, understood by people in their traditional cultures. They're agrarian. People are making their livings from the land. As Ken said, they're getting their fingers in the soil. And we need to create these synergies between biodiversity conservation and the ecosystem services. But most importantly, they have to also provide for the livelihoods of the people. They have to be put within a development context. And we need to consider food sovereignty. That is, people don't have to eat the same food everywhere in the world. There should be, as there is biodiversity as local social food systems, follow that. And we will have a better diet, more healthy foods, as well as healthy environments. So what this workshop is aiming to do, to make these examples, is to link conservation and development strategies to this biocultural landscape approach. And in order to do that, we're going to propose certain measures of resilience, innovation, and well-being that are not just ecological or biological, about the ecosystem, but also about the well-being of the people, of the people's cultures, of their innovation. Without this, it's just simply a landscape that eventually will die. And there's a tremendous gap, as we said. We talk about this new type of farming, this small-scale family farming. The fact is, we know, we may have a sense that it's important, but we need important global actors to fill the gaps on what this type of agriculture, where it's found, what it entails, what are the relationships it has with soil, with water, and really make it a global survey. And many of these things, and we've also heard in the morning, many of these systems from which we seek to derive lessons, because they maintain these mosaics, have often in the past been made illegal in one case, or looked down upon as backward. But when you see the complexity, for example, in the system in northern Thailand, one might look at this picture here and see a very simple landscape. To the indigenous peoples there are in fact about 8 or 9, 10 growing specific zones, all of which depends on maintaining this wild area as the source of water, as the source of the wild milkers, as the pollinators, so that the system really is the distinction between wild and cultivated. If you look at the whole landscape, it all has to be there. All these pieces have to fit. And what makes it fit is the culture. Moving to another part of the world, for example, in the Andean region, this is from Cochabamba, a drawing made by our colleagues there in that community. You see the whole mountain landscape where potato was domesticated. We talked about potato, the wild elephants being brought to the lowlands, to the highlands. And that process, which took place thousands of years ago, never stopped. People are still taking material. They're looking at the wild potatoes and seeing how they fit. It's an ongoing process. And you can see many of these. What's interesting to me is that what holds this whole landscape together as a vision. At the top is the sacred area, where not only is it sacred in terms of the cosmology, but that's where the potatoes that have become tired or sick because the viruses are brought to be cleansed. Maybe ultraviolet radiation helps too, but nonetheless, that whole system is held together by an indigenous conception of what is a landscape, what's a healthy landscape. And you can see that when I saw it, I said that looks like a mosaic, it looks like a quilt. And this was drawn by people. In many cases, people create environments that are rich. And this is now the oasis of southern Morocco. And these oases maintain a lot of diversity But when the people move, and in some cases we have seen oases where, because of migration, the traditional cultures leave, and what replaces it is a tourist hotel and swimming pools, and this biodiversity disappears. This has been maintained for hundreds of years, thousands of years actually. Then we talk about the future challenges. And the future challenges is that people are facing extremes that weren't there. This is in eastern Kenya, in Kitui. And you see in the same year, basically the same agricultural year, they suffered the driest month ever.